All right, so let's talk. This is what is this? This is media again. Now, a few years ago, oil prices were climbing. Like if you go back to 2002, 2003, 2004, oil was approximately $30 a barrel, and people were sure that it was going to be a problem when it got to $40 a barrel. If you plot out the oil usage over the last 40 or 50 years, there's a strong chance that we're never going to have as much oil as we have now, right? Now, if these guys are correct, and again, there's good reason to think they might be, if these guys are correct, we're in a world where the availability of oil is going to start going down. And indeed, it's kind of been going down a little bit for the last few years, okay? If you want to Google it up, it's called the peak oil argument, and it's deeply entertaining. But what I want to bring up here today isn't whether they're right or wrong, or whether they're right or wrong, because they'll argue till they're blue in the face, and you can figure that out by Googling it up. What I want to get at today is, considering what we talked about last time, how the narrative that people have in their head actually guides how they think about something like oil as a resource issue, all right? So this, you can see how this part piggybacks off of last presentation. So at least one group of people sees resource issues as a complete non-issue. Even if oil were to actually run out, which isn't their argument, but for the sake of discussion, even if oil really were to run out, we would figure something else out, right? And we're in the middle of, like, part of the reason that oil has gotten cheap lately is as a response to those high oil prices, we made our cars better. We had a great big economic slowdown, which is one way to conserve. We brought in new technology to get the more hard to find and hard to acquire oil out of the ground, if that makes sense. So technology is, kind of solving our problem. And if oil ever gets bad enough, we'll figure out a better way to do nuclear. We'll figure out a better way to do electric so that we don't have to even deal with oil. The whole reason we use petroleum the way we do now is partly because by the last time they went through this, they were running out of whale oil to run their lighting off of. So people had to look for a substitution, right? And these guys are almost impossible to have a conversation with, because as you talk to them, you will recognize that they're not being driven by facts. They're driven by their own mythology, their own narrative that technology will save us. You might think the U.S. is a Christian nation. It's not. It's a progress nation. That's our real religion. And so you say, well, you do realize that the reason we use oil is because nothing else even comes close. It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out as it doesn't come close as an energy source. Right over their head. They'll say, yeah, but look, hydrogen cars. You say, where do you think you get the hydrogen that we use now? Fossil fuels. Whew, no problem whatsoever. Like, they're absolutely not concerned with real honest problems because technology will save us, right? Essentially, these guys are arguing from not a point of acknowledging the problem, but a point of salvation, right? There's almost a hint of Christianity in the way that Americans seem to think about this. And I don't know if it's American or if it's European or if it's humans. I have no idea, but here's where it is. Okay, now there's an equally vocal other side, okay? And you may end up having conversations with these folks too. And again, it doesn't really matter what we're talking about because their response is the same. So think for a moment how much fossil fuels you're using right now. If you are vegan, because you think that's the right thing to do for the environment. What do you think those plastic shoes you're wearing in lieu of leather are made of? Oil, right? Just about anything that you ate for breakfast this morning, unless you are on some wild-ass paleo diet for the moment, you can feel the equinox coming. Unless you're on some wild paleo diet for the moment, you'll notice that most of our calories are just different ways to turn petroleum calories into calories we can actually eat, right? And I think that the last time I saw a calculation is it was something like for every 10 calories that you actually get, we spend 1,000 calories in terms of fossil fuels to get those calories, right? So you had a Pop-Tart for breakfast. That Pop-Tart was wrapped in a plastic foil. It was put in a box. It was shipped from the factory to the grocery, from the grocery to your house. And how did you get it to your house from the grocery? Your big-ass SUV, right? I like big-ass SUVs. Don't think I'm picking on anybody. I really, really miss my Durango, which got 12 miles to the gallon. It was terrible. And from the factory, all of that raw material had to get shipped from wherever farmers do things, had to get shipped from market there. The corn, Pop-Tarts are made of wheat, right? Well, except for the sugar and the corn syrup, that's all from corn. So when you realize most of what we eat is either corn or wheat or soy, and where did that come from? Well, in today's world, it's diesel for tractors, diesel for combining, diesel for shipping, right? So how many passes do you make over a field? It's at least 3 or 4, rarely 2. Okay, that's kind of crazy. And what about the chemicals that are used on it? Where do we actually get these chemicals? Well, even straight up fertilizer is ammonia, right? Now, ammonia is not petroleum, but one way to get ammonia is natural gas wells, right? So when you eat, what you're eating might seem like human calories. They're in fact petroleum calories. It's really crazy to think about. And then because we eat the way we do, then we need to work out, right? And so how do we work out? We get in that 12 mile to the gallon Durango. We drive to the gym. Maybe the gym's 5 miles away. There and back is 10 miles, which means I used darn near a gallon of gasoline for this. Gasoline has tens of thousands of calories per gallon. And then I go and I stand on the treadmill and I burn electricity to run off 500 calories of food, right? You can see that the accounting here, the energy accounting, is completely flawed. It cannot work forever. All right? Now, that's great. Not my problem, because I get a great life for now, and the future can worry about the future. However, if you're looking at this from a perspective of we have nothing as good as petroleum for the time being, even nuclear has tremendous issues, and even if we got nuclear to work, the only way that's going to work is if we electrify our entire auto and trucking infrastructure. Exactly how is that going to work, right? It means a complete rebuild of all of America. Pretty big hurdles. Now, these guys have some good arguments behind what they're saying, but if you listen to them long enough, you'll notice that they're not actually arguing from a place of facts. They're arguing from a mythology of apocalypse. And anytime you turn on TV and watch those doomer prepper shows, I love them. The discussion those guys will have follows the same narrative over and over and over again, right? Either the electrical grid's going to fail, and then the computers are going to fail, and then, 3 days and the grocery stores are going to be empty, and then there's going to be rioting in the streets, so I can't be near the big city, and then they're going to come they, quote unquote, unknown they, they're going to come radiating out of the cities into the countryside. And so I got to have my bunker underground with my food and my guns. Okay, now think of all of the actual instances of civil collapse we may have seen over the last 100 years, right? We've got Weimar Germany. We've got, we've got all over Africa off and on. You've got Somalia. We've got Katrina for here at home. We've got, the thing is, if you start thinking about it, there are actual cases of civil collapse that you could study, but they're not doing that, right? Because their mythology, their narrative comes from a sci-fi apocalypse movie and other internet prepper dudes. This is exactly what I was talking about last time for how we think about these things, okay? Now, I don't want to talk about oil today. I just want to use that as an example. All right, when we talk about technology and media, how do I have this set up? Okay, when we talk about technology and media, there's really three things I think that come to mind that you have to focus on. And different discussions will focus on different aspects of these in different ways. But let's look at what these mean, and then let's think through what the future is actually going to hold. Because it's entirely possible, like I'm serious about this, it's entirely possible we are standing on the front end of revolutions or evolutions every bit as large as the Industrial Revolution or every bit as large as Gutenberg. So you remember on the first day, on the first slide from this week's discussion, I have the Gutenberg moment. We're going to get at that, right? Okay, so number one, big data. You guys understand big data? I believe Amanda's going to talk a little bit about big data later. But when it comes to big data, there are a couple of things that are worth knowing. First of all, every search you put into Google, right, gets logged somewhere. That includes when you put it on porn mode. That just means mom can't find the traces of what you were looking at. But it's still going out there to Google, right? Every person you click on to see on OkCupid, oh, I think she's pretty, click. Where's Rachel Ray? Click. All of that gets tracked, okay? And what's important about that is when you're using the computer, you feel like you're doing it alone. And especially if you put it into no cookie mode, you really feel like you're being private. So part of what these guys see when they look at your digital trail through the dating sites is your unfiltered thoughts, right? Now, this gets a little bit weird. Facebook can now tell with something like 80% accuracy whether you're gay or not. Not based on your comments, but simply based on your likes and your dislikes. Whatever the culture that goes along with gayness is, Facebook can track it. Right? It's a little bit crazy when you think about it, but if you like this and this and this and this, and everyone else did, bam, 80% chance you're gay. I have been told, it's been a little while since I looked at it, but I've been told they can kind of tell, they can make a 60% guess whether or not you were abused as a child. Right? Again, based on the stuff you're putting in and how they correlate that with somebody else. Tell me that's not a little bit creepy, a little bit terrifying. I think you guys probably heard this story. I hope I don't screw it up. But when you think about Google, Google knows when you're moving. How does it know? Because it's tracking what you're, it's a little bit obvious, right? Warner Robins, Georgia. Does it suck? What's the crime rate? What are the houses worth? Where are the schools for the kids, right? Google's following all that stuff. Well, you're not looking at that stuff because you care about Warner Robins, Georgia. You're looking at that stuff because you got to move in 6 months. Google knows it. I'm sure you guys heard the story of a company that started sending out pregnancy ads to a family because the daughter was Googling pregnancy stuff. And it was actually the teenage daughter that was pregnant. She hadn't told her parents, and the ads start coming in the mail. Oops. Google knows this. Why do they know it? Because exactly the things you're asking about are what tell the world out there who you are, what's interesting to you, and what's going on in your life. All right? Now, again, you sort of know this, and you sort of don't care because you still use the sites, but we don't have any privacy, right? And, you know, we can talk a little bit about that later on. That's, I think, what Amanda's going to focus on. But for the moment, just keep in mind, Orwell's 1984 is here. The world we live in is more surveilled than Orwell's world. And you gave it all up voluntarily, right? That's a little bit terrifying, all right? Remember when the Boston bombing happened? All they had to do was go back and look, and they could track where these guys were and everything they did for the last 48, 72 hours, just with traffic cameras, people's cell phone footage at the thing, who they were texting, right? These guys, if folks would have known what to look for, this wouldn't have happened. And if you wanted to do something bad, not that you should, but just as an exercise in what world we live in, if you really wanted to do something bad, how would you do it? Right? How are you going to do something that's not going to get caught on the security cameras? How are you going to do something that doesn't place you with your phone in the place the bad thing happens with a GPS? How are you going to leave your phone at home on Tuesday that the crime happens, and that's not going to stand out as a great big, yeah, whatever. He had his phone every day, but the day the bad thing happened? Hello, red flags. If you start trying to think honestly about how to get away with something, it should make you a little bit nervous. Like, you don't have privacy. And maybe you're okay with that, right? I'm not really sure. Now, that's a little bit on the one side. The flip side, however, is think about how algorithms work in today's world, okay? You do know, I think you know this, you should know this, computer algorithms do a better job of treating you than your doctor does. Let me say that again. The computer does a better job than your doctor. All right? Now, most of us don't want to go to a computer, and there's certainly a downside to using a computer algorithm to treat illness, but for most of the time, the computer will ask. They'll work out the algorithm. Actual physicians will help on the algorithm. If this, then that. If this and that. What's this symptom? What's this symptom? What's this symptom? Dunk, 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 dunk. The computers run about 70% accuracy, which doesn't sound great, but that's better than doctors. And if you know actual physicians, or you have something that's even a little bit problematic, you know how often you have to go back for a medication adjustment, a re-diagnosis, right? So then all of a sudden it doesn't sound like 70% like the computer's doing better. Is that hard to believe, right? Now, just imagine in a world where healthcare is too damn expensive already, and where pharmaceuticals can cost, like I said before, 100,000 lives a year. What about a world where the computer algorithm gets it right more than the docs? Maybe we want to actually turn over some healthcare to computers. I'm not sure if we do or don't, but you can see where the temptation is. You can always keep tweaking the algorithm, and once it's bought, the computer and the software, it's cheaper than paying someone $100,000 a year plus benefits. Who's going to complain, right? I don't know if I'd go into medicine right now. So on the plus side, as patients, look at how awesome it would be to have evidence-driven medicine where the algorithms did it right, okay? We've talked a little bit in class about the Google car. The Google car, it's hard to say, and I'm a little dry. The Google car, when you think about it, is a lot about hardware. It's got to have the right sensors, and it's got to have the right processing power, but it's more about algorithms. If this is going on and this is going on and this is going on, what do you do, right? And if you want to think about how an algorithm works, think about how you process what you're going to do when you're driving through a traffic situation, right? Here's a bike example. You're pulling up, it's a four-way. Are you going to wait for the light or not? Well, first of all, what's the other traffic? Is there other traffic? Because if there's not, I ain't waiting, right? But you got to say, if this, then this. If there is other traffic, then you get shunted down to a different branch of the decision tree. Where is that other traffic? What are they actually doing, right? At what point do you give up and hit the sidewalk, right? Which is also illegal for what it's worth. When you try and follow out that decision tree, you'll recognize that you're making decisions while you're driving on a day-to-day basis that are snap, just like that, okay? But after something like the Google car has 1 million miles driven, and they've got data on all of that, and they've got someone sitting in the passenger seat taking notes of what's going on so that they can keep tweaking that data. With the right hardware, those cars are very quickly going to be safer than you are. Okay? Now, that's partly about computing power. You got to have processors that can mash through that data. I wish I remembered, but I heard someone talking about the human brain in this, and the time it takes you to make a decision what you're going to do in a traffic situation like that is about 1/16 of a second. And the computers are getting pretty close. And when you're doing that, you're actually pulling in 1,000 different pieces of data, and you're prioritizing them in a little bit of an algorithm. Your brain's doing this, you're not doing this. Like if you had to sit and think it through, you realize how hard it is to figure out actually what rules you drive by. It's tricky. But your brain is doing it just like that, and the computers are close to this, which is a little bit terrifying. And once the computers are safer, well, that gets to be a little bit interesting, doesn't it? Okay, go ahead.
A lot of the new cars have that technology where when you're backing
Mm-hmm.
and it picks something up in the peripherals, that it'll apply the brakes for you.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing if you're driving forward and something's stopping in front of you, and it will actually, some of the newer cars have that technology to stop you
Before you actually can.
before you even consciously make that decision.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And that's on the luxury cars right now. Well, 15 years ago, only luxury cars had airbags. Now everybody has airbags. I actually saw, when I was researching this, I want to say it was a Volvo truck. This truck, and it's not going to be released here for a while, but it was a demonstration. This truck, the driver was not a driver. He was more like an engineer, because the software in the truck handled most of the driving, including the emergency stop. I mean, in a sense, that's really, really awesome. But when you see a company that has enough, and a driver who has enough confidence in their software to, as part of the operation, be the guy driving in front of now I'm sure it wasn't loaded, but it's still a 10 or 15,000 pound semi truck, slam on the brakes just to show that the semi truck will stop without the operator doing anything. That's a lot of confidence. And the software already exists in this Volvo truck that I was talking about, this Volvo tractor, that they use the guy to back up to loading docks to keep an eye on traffic. But for cruising down the highway, which is 90% of an OTR job, cruising down the highway, his chair actually swivels out of the way. He does a Sudoku, a crossword. He's reading the newspaper, right? And the tractor is doing its tractoring all on its own. It's a little bit mind-blowing, but you know how many people we lose a year? We lose 36,000 people a year to car crashes. Now, there's a couple of things about that that's a little bit frustrating to me. we drive as much as we do because we built our cities a certain way. So we have chosen to sacrifice 36,000 is a nice round number. It is always a little up or a little down, but that's 100 people a day, which is 2 per state per day, right? And we choose that because we like suburban living, because we've built suburban living into our zoning codes. Like, that's a conscious choice. The thing is, you can't have a conversation with people about this because they just aren't ready to have that conversation. The second thing about that, though, is what if the cars didn't crash? Why are cars crashing? They're crashing because you and I are crappy drivers. I was a little bit late. There was a moment on the way here where I made a decision that I questioned immediately after I made it. But I still have both mirrors on the car, so it's all okay, right? A smart car wouldn't have done that. A smart driver wouldn't have done that, but a late driver might. Right? Like, the most dangerous part of the car is me. The most dangerous part of the cars on the road is you, because you're the traffic around me, right? This technology, this number crunching, this big data analysis allows that not to be the case, right? That's a little bit fascinating. Now, this computing power here, this part blows me away, but it's a little bit fun to think about. Of course, what I have up here, the tech nerds in here already know this, it's called Moore's Law. And Moore's Law says every couple of years, and I should have memorized it, every couple of years you have a doubling of the processing power on your chip, okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is there really is a physics limit to how many you can squeeze on a chip before you actually melt the damn thing. But what's more interesting is, the physics limit aside, if you think of this as the knowledge capacity, right? The actual horsepower of the thing, other than just the transistors on a chip, and plot this backwards, you can go all the way back to Gutenberg, and it actually works. The information processing capacity of the human world in the Gutenberg time, and then start Moore's Law, up until you get to computers, and our computers is, right, this tiny little slice of this is this the right direction for you? No, it's this way. This ever increasing exponential law, and here's computers for us, okay? Here's where this gets really, really weird. Well, the computers that I bought, not to go to high school or go to college, because, well, I didn't do computers in high school. They sort of sucked, and they were really for nerds. But even by the time I went to college, we're not talking graphic user interfaces only on the Macs. The Windows are still, right, actually DOS, and they're still blinking cursors, or it's the friggin' VAX. Ugh. Okay. You couldn't quantify the processing power of a computer by the time I started grad school. It wasn't even as smart as a cockroach. All right? And that's like 95. By the time you get to 2000, they're already comparing it to the processing power of a spider. Better than a cockroach, right? And 2010, we're up to a lizard. Which is, lizards, they're not smart, but they don't actually have to be. You'll notice they evolve quite well on their own, right? You turn a bunch of lizards loose and they go find a hot rock and they find stuff to eat, and some of them get eaten by birds, but some of them make it. And our computers are already past that, right? To the monkey? Wait, by 2020 they expect to make a computer as smart as a monkey? Yes, right? And for those of you that don't know, we're already 5 or 10 years past computers beating humans at chess, right? That computer was called Big Blue, and he beat the chess master. The chess master had one last win in him, and he did it by recognizing how the computer was processing and thinking, and so he gambled and tricked it by doing something that didn't make rational sense, and that was the last game they ever won. Because then the computer figured that out too. Wait, 2025? And my laptop is going to have the same processing power as my own noggin? What does that actually mean? Right? Go ahead.
You mean that humans are dumbing down because they're letting the computer do all the work?
Well, we're changing. That's for certain, right? We already know it makes more sense to, obviously it makes more sense to let the computer do the calculations than to do it on paper.
All you stats, right?
Yes. I do not teach stats by teaching them how to do stats. When I teach stats, it's how to click stats. Because it's otherwise there's too much whining.
You know what?
I don't know if everyone in back heard, but there's plenty of whining about stats at the beginning of class. Okay. Well, now, if we're zooming forward, now 2060 seems like a long ways away. I'm going to be like 90 years old if I make it that far. That would be awesome. I hope I do. If you're 20 sitting in this classroom now, how far away is 2060? It's only like 45 years, right? Which means you'll only be 65 years old when, if this calculation holds forth, the computers are not going to be as smart as each and every one of you, but the computers are going to be as smart as all of you together. Okay? Now, for a gazillion years, ever since we started using machinery, the fear of HAL and Skynet and, this has been a theme for as long as we've had robot helpers, right? It was a theme when the robot helpers were slaves, right? There was a reason you didn't let them have firearms and didn't let them learn to read. Because the robots might revolt. And now we've solved that problem with a different kind of free energy, cheap labor. Only it's going to be smarter than us? Dang, right? Okay. It's a little bit crazy to think about, but there are actually sober scientists who usually don't sound like, pot-smoking doomers. Oh man, it's all going to end. There are sober scientists who are looking at this saying, by the time the computers can outthink us, which the folks that are interested in this call the singularity, by the time the computers are able to outthink us, we've got a real problem, right? If the biggest danger in the car is the human driver, what's the biggest danger to human happiness and well-being on the planet? Would a computer be satisfied with a global peace, sort of, that rests upon not mutually assured destruction between the Soviets and the Americans? Because, let's face it, something like 10 nations have nuclear weapons now, right? So nuclear weapons are great because we know that as soon as anyone uses them, they all lose, so no one's going to use them. Do you sleep well at night with that kind of foreign policy? I hope so, because that's the kind of foreign policy we actually have. If we can't trust the human to drive better than the computer drives the car, what's a computer going to think of that kind of a foreign policy situation, right? It's a little bit problematic. Now, obviously, I can't get the kids' Apple to talk to the Bluetooth speaker, so we're not there yet. But it's an interesting thought exercise, right? Now, that's just computer power. Now, notice how big data and computing power, they sort of go together, right? And that's also where you start to see this synergistic or multiplier effect, because improving our algorithms essentially means writing more and longer code. And all of that code doesn't work if we don't have the hardware to process that code. But if we have the hardware to process that code, then we can actually keep tweaking it, right? So, And anyone that bought computers in around 1995 and then had to buy them again in 97 and again in 99 and again in '01 and again in '03, right? Because the hardware sped up and then the software sped up and then the hardware, so that it only took 2 years for a $1,000 tool or a $1,500 tool to be almost useless. Thankfully, our computers right now are so powerful that when they write better software, it's not specifically slowed down much, because they're both outside of the realm of useful to me. Go ahead.
HP has it to where the HP computers are only compatible with HP printers. Like me and my husband, we love the Brother printers. They're really nice, but it would not compute with our HP computer. And we went through literally 5 printers until he didn't want to buy HP, so we finally bought one, and it worked fine.
That's nice.
Where you can only buy an HP printer for your HP computer.
Sure. Yeah, and there's going to be obnoxious business practices throughout this whole thing. It's always been stupid that Apple and Windows couldn't talk to each other better. I mean, seriously. It's kind of stupid that in today's world, Apple and Android don't talk to each other better. It's just because they're playing hardcore in terms of business. But it's frustrating, but it's just a reality. Okay, right? And you can see how this works, right? Yeah. And then at some point, well, anyway, it blows me away when I think about it, because I kid you not, I got in trouble when I was in like 5th or 6th grade. I got in trouble once. Only once, right? We were learning computer programming, and this is like the Apple II Plus, and I was at Catholic school. And so I had taught my computer, I had programmed it, a little program, to flash obscene words in different colors, right? And that's when Miss Johns came along. And I'm like, oh, crap, stop. And then, well, that won't kill, it's not going, so I just turned it off. Oh, Michael, look, your problem is that the monitor's not on. Click. Oh, thank you, Miss Johns. Okay, now, it's not a great story at all, but if you had to program those things, to get it to flash in different colors, you actually had to tell the computer which pixel in a thing of like 120 pixels, which pixel was going to be red, and red had a value, okay? And it would have been impossible to break that screen of pixels into 1,000,000 pixels. It would have been possible to break it into 1,000 pixels. The hardware didn't have the horsepower to handle it. That's alliteration. We couldn't have more than 14 colors or something, because those 14 colors, the hardware couldn't handle it. So that's 1985. By the time we get to 1985 and Windows introduces a color-based Windows system, you recognize that you've gone right? You're following that exponential curve again. This was not a linear thing, because now you're applying, I think by that time they already had 1,000,000 colors. But you're applying, right, a code from a set of millions, and you're not fixated on pixels, you're fixated on a virtual window, and it still all comes down to zeros and ones saying this thing needs to be doing this here on this screen, right? So that by the time you're thinking of this, it's just, whatever. But that's all it is, right? Zeros and ones. So we need the horsepower in order to crunch the code. We need better code to keep improving the horsepower, and on and on and on and on. It's awesome. All right, connection. So here's the other part. The connection here, and I have 2 things listed. First of all, and this is actually worth thinking about. So Europe has had internet for and cell phone connection longer and more thoroughly than the US had. Some of you guys still live out in the middle of nowhere and have to use like terrible dial-up, just a few of you. If you're in the sticks in the United States, you don't necessarily have good internet. But if you're in the state, if you're in the cities, you've got decent internet. And you don't even need a computer anymore because it's your cell phone. And since you got to have a cell phone, right? That's how it all works. So you guys have good access to internet. When you think about what that means, it means that all of human knowledge is at your fingertips. I mean, you know this. This is sort of like old-fashioned rah internet. But it's true. If I said something about existentialism and you didn't know what I was talking about, you could write it down, leave class, Google up existentialism, get a list of the 5 most important authors, go right back to the same wiki, pull up what Sartre said, pull up what Heidegger said, pull up what Nietzsche said, right? And you're going to be as educated on that as somebody from 100 years ago who went to Harvard. Well, they might know it better, but you're going to have access to it. And if you care to learn it, you can keep learning it. Now, existentialism doesn't seem that important, but I mean, I like existentialism, but MIT's curriculum is online, right? You want to teach yourself coding, that's online. You want to teach yourself app writing, that's online. The only thing keeping you from knowledge is your own self-discipline. Okay? Now, that's for us, and we live in the developed world. What do we do with Africa? Africa has billions of people, and only maybe 25% internet intrusion. Penetration, that's better. What about India? India's got, I don't know what their percentage is, but they've got 1 billion people, and internet's only for the ones who are well-to-do. What about China? Same story, right? Now, when you look at how the internet was built in the United States, we've had telegraphs and phones for 100 years, so the internet had to piggyback on top of that. And if we're talking 1995, the internet was actually laid in the ground with your coaxial cable. Your cable is where your internet comes from now, or your telephone is where your internet comes from now. Those are physical connections. But if you'll pay attention, you'll notice that the next generation of internet is not physical, right? Many people are already using their phone for more internet than they are their computer, okay? And mobile sites, not mobile sites, but internet vendors recognize this. It's kind of interesting. What does this mean for like an online porn site? How are you going to, right? If people are watching this stuff on a little screen, how do you film that? What's the bandwidth for that? Right? It's a different set of stuff. And every internet vendor is moving that way because that's the way it is. Well, go ahead.
Listening to GPB the other day, and this guy decided he really didn't need his Verizon.
Yeah.
So he turned his phone on airplane and just did the spots where there was internet. And for a month,
right.
He was able to do everything without paying Verizon.
That's awesome.
And he wrote a book on it, so you can do it too.
Yes. Well, and think about it. If that's if you're stealing people's Wi-Fi, and you could use VoIP, voice over internet, or something like Skype. So you can actually have phone calls with people. Not that youngsters use the phone, but you can have phone calls with people that are turned into data, right? You could totally do that. So if we go to Africa and we say to ourselves, how do we get these people internet? We don't actually have to lay a zillion miles of hard cable, right? We only have to put up a few cell towers. And you'll notice we can leapfrog the technology that we're still frustrated with and move directly to 2G, 3G, and eventually 4G and 5G wireless. And once they have that, they have their phones, right? They have internet. So right now, interestingly, if you go to other places in the world, and Africa's one of them, I don't know which country, but I'm American, right? It's Africa. I'm thinking, didn't Bush say something about the country Africa once, and everybody roasted him on that? So yeah, the country Africa. Those guys are already ahead of us in terms of paying for things with their cell phones. So they don't have to carry around a wallet if you have your cell phone. They're actually sending payments to each other directly using apps that work as bank account apps. So I want to pay you for, I buy a car from you, send $5,000 to Cecil, blink. Cecil says, all right, take the car, bam, right? Now, what does that mean in terms of business development? It actually gives them tools that you and I don't have. And if we actually give African villagers the capability to build businesses, right? What does that mean? And if, on the backside of that, they also have access to all of human knowledge, what does that mean, right? Now notice, one of the things that's going on here is we've just accelerated big data, because if we get 1 billion people in Africa online, we've got more data, right? The second thing is we've actually improved the computing power. Even with all the same hardware, if right now 1.5 billion out of the 7 billion people on the planet are on the internet thinking about problems, we humans are intelligent. I mean, the computers will catch up, it sounds like. But a huge part of our problem solving comes down to all of us together thinking about a problem. And if we can get 1 billion Africans also thinking about that problem, and 1 billion Indians thinking about those problems, and 1 billion Chinese thinking about those problems, notice we've driven up the intelligence of the system, just as much as if we would have accelerated the chips involved, right? So all of these things come together to accelerate their impact. And then finally, the things talking to each other. This one's a little bit weird. And, the surveillance opportunities are a little bit creepy, but I just saw an ad. This was awesome. I'm not going to buy it, but I just saw an ad for a garage door opener that was Wi-Fi enabled so that I could, if I was away and I left my garage door up, which has happened, I can check it and it'll say, your garage door is up, dummy, close. And the garage door closes, right? Right now, we've only got one remote that operates the garage door because I can't get the stupid thing programmed to this 1985 garage door opener. So my wife gets the remote because I'm nice that way. Instead, it could be on my phone, right? I don't need it in my car, it's on my phone. How cool is that? If I buy a nice new car, I carry the key around in my pocket, I don't put it in. I don't drive new cars. But I carry the key, I rent them though. I carry the key around in my pocket and the car is talking to my pocket, which actually sounds a little creepy. The car's talking to my pocket and I get in and push start, and because I got the little pill in my pocket, it already knows it, right? So the car is talking to my pocket. Now the car can also talk to my phone, but everybody knows that. But some of the capabilities that come along with that are kind of impressive. So there's also a thermostat, and I believe it's operated by Google, the same people who are programming cars. The thermostat, the thermostat comes shipped with save money programs. And I got no problem with that because I'm a cheap SOB sometimes. And so, but I don't want to save that much money. And it turns off on Sundays and Saturdays at like 9 o'clock in the morning, and it goes down to, 55 or something. And I'm telling the kids, suck it up. No, it's not. But anyway, right? I go in and I put it up to whatever I want for that section. I'm always adjusting this thing. And here comes the Google thermostat, which notices exactly when I'm adjusting, when I'm not adjusting, right? When the save money program actually works, to the point where it learned from me so that I don't need to actually adjust it anymore, right? It's not cheap, so I don't have it. Now you can bet that thing's also Wi-Fi enabled and probably has a vacation plan so that when I'm away, I can keep it cold. And when I'm home, I can keep it nice and warm over the winter, right? And I can even fake it out. And so when people are projecting this forward, there are folks who are like, oh, you can get your refrigerator and it'll tell you when you're out of milk. I'm not sure that's interesting. But it's kind of impressive. And this is because the machines are talking to each other, right? If I get a Fitbit, it talks to my cell phone, it backs it up somewhere on the cloud, and who knows, it probably talks to the to the thermostat and says, he's really hot right now, turn the air conditioning down a little bit. Who knows? And notice how the things talking to each other then gets us right back in the realm of big data, right? Because if I'm wearing a Fitbit and it knows my height and weight because I told it, or maybe I'm checking every morning, I do believe you can get scales that are Bluetooth enabled. Ooh, thanks, no. You think my insurance company is going to be interested in tracking what my Fitbit says about my sleep, what my Fitbit says about my driving habits? Because if it's got a GPS, it knows I'm doing 65 on a 25-mile-an-hour road, right? The insurance company wants to know that. And when these things can shine a light, like this thing has it, this thing has a light on the back, and this is just a plain old phone. This isn't fancy. It's got a light on the back. It measures my blood pressure and my, I don't know what else. Not blood pressure. Heart rate variability. That's all stuff that the insurance company is going to want to know. So here's the data that's coming from this hardware. There's a little bit of a benefit to me, right? I can track my heart rate for training. What am I training for? I don't know, not to die yet. It can track all that, but then there's all this data that's going out there that's good for someone else to use, okay? Now that's just me in my house. When you start considering that key to these cars not crashing on the interstate is going to be they're going to talk to each other, right? Why not send some near-field communication to the car in front of you to get what the speed control is set to on that, right? And by the time the one way up here says, oop, I'm stopping because it's a hazard, it can send it back 3, 4, 5 cars far faster than you're going to ever know, right? So the cars are going to talk to each other. There's no reason for the car not to talk to the house. You start to see that a lot of these things talking to each other mean that they will handle things automatically so you don't have to think about them, right? Now think about what this means industrially. Walmart already has done some of this in terms of moving their warehouse and distribution model away from here's the warehouse, here's the store needs something, the truck goes and gets it at the warehouse and takes it to the store, right? Walmart already doesn't do that. The factory makes the things, they put it on a truck, and Walmart knows and has modeled how much stuff they need, and so they're only ever making enough stuff, and what's held in storage is the crap that's on the trucks, right? So here's a truck and it's got 2, and here's a truck and it's got 2, and here's a truck that it's got 2. So instead of having 6 sitting in a warehouse, there's 2 on 3 different trucks. This one's coming on Tuesday, this one's coming on Thursday, and this one's coming on Saturday, right? It's a little bit awesome when you think about that. And that's with a computer-controlled logistics system, but still people trying to tweak that. The inventory control, that's, people aren't doing that. The computers are doing that, and they're doing it already. Okay, well, what about the robots in Detroit making cars? By the time they can talk to each other, they're going to be more on top of their maintenance than the actual people working in the factory are. And if we're talking about GE, which owns something like 400 factories, and they own everything from soup to nuts, then their robots can tell their other factories, right, what they're going to need, and that can get built into the inventory and supply chain way over here so that when the thing wears out, the next thing is actually right at the door, right? Now, that's astounding, and that's coming from things talking to each other, right? And ever higher levels of software integration. Go ahead.
I can look at the product on Lowe's.com and it'll tell me if it's in the store or not, ready for pickup.
Yes.
How, just 10 years ago, you had to call somebody and said, I need to know if you got a product in stock and if you can't pull it off for me.
It's a little bit of,
Look at their inventory at your own house.
Yes. It's a little bit astounding that way. My wife works in retail. And 10 years ago, they got a CD that updated all of the new products that you had to put in and load into the inventory. They didn't know what was in the warehouse. They didn't know what was in-house, especially if they weren't keeping good track. And of course, nowadays, it's exactly as you described. Some central server somewhere knows everything, including what's in-house, what's in storage, what's in backlist. Right? And you can find all that stuff out. Crazy. And that's only in 10 years. Go ahead.
Amazon. Amazon keeps things in warehouses in central areas that they know what you're going to buy before you buy it, and they keep it on hand just in case you want to buy it, so that way it'll get to you faster.
Yes.
Amazon's scary. I love it though.
All of this stuff is a little scary, but that's exactly it. So, and now, who does Amazon sell to? Everybody. I mean, I use Amazon for exploring products. All they have to do is track what I look at, and they're going to know exactly what I like. Whether or not they know I'm going to buy it, but they know, right, what I'm looking at. They're going to know what everyone who's just like me is looking at. They're going to have a really very strong predictive capability to say, this is good, this is what people want, this is, I mean, like you said, they know what you want before you want it. And they're also, if they're good, if you think about what we were talking about last time, they're going to work on tweaking the system to encourage you to want it, to the point of buying it. So we know that she's going to like this kind of thing because that's what kind of person she is, because she's just like everyone else with this set of characteristics. Maybe she needs a little bit of a push. And before you know it, without knowing it, here's the TV channel, here's the YouTube playing. I think you really need to buy one of these. You have no idea this is connected, but it's all connected, right? Go ahead.
Okay, I just noticed maybe 3 days ago on Facebook, like, I was on Google and I was, Googling, jeans at a certain store. I didn't purchase anything, and I don't really pay attention to much of the sidebar stuff, the ads and whatnot, but I noticed about 3 days ago, Facebook had a picture of the exact same pair of jeans that I was looking at, and I was like, that's really kind of weird that Facebook knew that I was looking at these jeans. Okay, and I mean, it may be doing that for a while, but I just realized that. I mean, I don't pay attention to the ads or whatever, but I thought that was
right. The best thing is if you don't pay attention to the ads, then they're working subconsciously, right? And that's part of what I wanted you guys to get from last time's discussion. If people like me do our job well, we're influencing you and you don't even know you're being influenced. Go ahead, Indiana.
Oh yeah, I was just saying, because every time you go on the website and then say you go back on Facebook or whatever, all the ads will be on what you just went on.
Right.
I kind of know, I know about the website clearly because I was on there.
Right.
Every time.
Yeah, and different people have different feelings regarding that. Like on the one hand, if it's stuff I like, and this is where some of these philosophical differences come in. Clearly I'm not going to buy Vagisil. It doesn't really meet my needs. But, what's that?
Somebody sends you for it then.
Yeah, and I saw on a commercial you could use it as body soap, right? We were talking about that. That was this class, wasn't it? But the thing is that so the girls are all watching some crazy show on TLC. I don't know what it is, but I'm guessing TLC is a chick channel. You know why I think TLC is a chick channel? Is it because I'm a stereotypical anti-feminist asshole? Maybe. Or it could be the never-ending parade of Vagisil commercials. Right? They know who watches those, sort of. But when it comes to your experience on the web, they don't know what you sort of might like based on your demographics. House full of girls, let's try and sell them some Vagisil. They know actually what you do like, right? Because of what you clicked that you liked and what you researched on the net and. So on the one hand, yeah, I already know about this, so why are you trying to sell it to me? On the other hand, at least I don't have to watch Vagisil commercials. And it's sort of what do you do with that? Go ahead.
I was looking on eBay at one point. I had listings up on eBay.
Yeah?
And then I went to another site a little later, and the advertisement that was on was for eBay, but it had my listing on it.
Well, that's a little too tight, right? I think she'd like this. Go ahead.
Well, when you get to be my age, it's the same thing when they give you those little CVS discount cards.
Yes.
Every time they ask you for your red card, they're logging what you just bought, which you already have already. Try telling them you don't want to give them your red card. I got fussed at. She said, you have to give it to me. I said, no, I don't. It'll stay in my wallet.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because they want to know what you're buying so they can send your coupons, there's a reason why you get a coupon for diapers if you have a baby when you go to Kroger.
Mm-hmm.
You already bought them, they're gonna give you coupons for the next time.
Right. And look at how, so you're doing that because you're going to save a quarter on something, right?
Right.
And for them, that quarter, they're getting your information, but that's also getting pooled with everybody's information. Now, considering that Amazon tracks all that, Google tracks all that, Facebook tracks all that, Kroger tracks all that, Publix, weirdly enough, doesn't. CVS tracks all that, Walgreens tracks all that. Then you start to get a sense of how much data is actually out there on you, okay? Now, I promised a little bit of Armageddon. If you are a doomer in your mindset, if you're an apocalyptic person, right? We have built a terrifying world. You cannot pick your nose without being caught on a traffic camera somewhere, right? You can't, well, period. You can't get away with anything. And they're likely using this information to predict how likely you are to do something wrong, right? You have no privacy. Now, to a certain extent, we've sort of like acquiesced to that because the modern world is really neat, and so what if somebody knows what deodorant I buy? But this is not a notion of privacy that would have flown in years past. The whole, well, if you got nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried, is not the idea of privacy that ever would have flown with our founding fathers. No jobs. What work do we need to do if everything that the computers do, they do better than us? What work do we need to do if all the dangerous stuff is done by computers? Right? I mean, it's a little bit creepy. I don't really know. And I don't know if anybody does. Again, in the past, the one philosophy always said, for everything that's disrupted, there'll be more growth and more movement forward. Okay? That's awesome. But if by 2025 the computer's as smart as I am and can crunch algorithms at the speed that my mind crunches just car crashing, but also crunches the mathematics stuff that I have to sit and work out and get wrong, but it does it just as fast and just as flawlessly, then we're in trouble, right? The increasing inequality, if that world, which again may be right around the corner, if that world happens and it's anything like this world, you can get a sense of what it's going to look like. If we go out to Silicon Valley, you're going to find millionaires. You're going to find hardcore free market Ayn Rand capitalists. You're going to find people who are proud of breaking the system and building something new and better, and they're well rewarded for it. If you stay in South Georgia, maybe you can call people for Geico. Now, I'm overstating it. I love it here. I'm not trying to pick on it here, but you recognize if you're running that system, that's where the real rewards are. The regular jobs for the rest of us seem to be diminishing. What does that look like? Well, if we follow these trends, it does not make a world that looks wonderful, does it? Now, I started talking about oil just as an example, but are we sure that everything's going to be politically stable? And this can continue and continue and continue forever? Are we sure we're going to have good access to electricity for the next 50 or 100 years? What if we have problems with something like oil and transportation changes, right? I'm not really sure. What if we run into global instability and nations sort of shift? Is that going to have an influence? I mean, you'll notice that these guys, they're thinking, when they're saying, it's all going to be awesome, there's a lot they're glossing over, right? Someone who was a techno-futurist in 1905, oh my goodness, look what we can do, right? Probably weren't thinking of machine guns in World War II. They probably weren't thinking of firebombing or machine guns, World War I, and poison gas. They probably weren't thinking about firebombing in World War II, and they probably weren't thinking about nuclear bombs in World War II, right? Now, I'm not trying to be melodramatic, but the future brings good as well as bad. And if you're the apocalyptic doomer, the bad is really friggin' terrifying, right? Okay. But I don't want to depress you too much. So here's the other thing. Now, again, when people say the real truth is we kind of muddle along somewhere in between, right? We do have a world that's quite awesome compared to 1905, but we did have to make it through World War I, World War II, and let's face it, we live in one of the better places in the world to actually be. So it's great, yeah, for us, and I'm okay with that. But we're harvesting the good side of what could have been good and bad. So the salvation ones, the ones who see this as, oh my goodness, the biggest problems that we have, we're going to have more computer power to throw at it. We're going to have algorithms that are self-correcting to throw at those problems. And we're not going to have a billion of us online thinking about it. We're going to have 3 or 4 billion of us online, right? Do you think we can solve cancer if we have that kind of computing power and that many people willing to think about it that hard? It's a little bit shocking, isn't it? But maybe we could, right? The computers do the dangerous work, all right? So if the computers drive for us, it's kind of terrible to think about. Some friends of mine, or some friends of friends back home, lost a kid in a car crash last year just because she was a 16, 17-year-old driver going from a slow road onto a very fast one and got T-boned. Might as well be turning onto Highway 96. I mean, it's exactly the way everything is here. How things don't crash more, I don't know. What if you didn't have to lose your daughter at 18 to a car crash? Right? Is that worth the future? Well, if it's my daughter, the answer is, oh, hell yes. Right? What if you don't have to have people underground mining coal, dying of black lung disease? Is that a good thing? Absolutely. Right? What if farming can be done more like a computer operator and less like a guy getting his sleeve caught in the PTO on something? That's a good thing, right? So a lot of our problems and the stuff that destroys us now could actually be taken care of, right? The third point, and this is actually the point I want to leave you with. It's a little bit terrifying when you're thinking about the future and you're thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Maybe I can call people for Geico. Look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with calling people for Geico. There's nothing wrong with nursing. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But if you're projecting into the future, notice the real opportunity is going to be in being a part of getting those 2 or 3 billion humans online, right? I mean, if you think about what the computer revolution has done in the United States in terms of job creation and new work, we've just begun, okay? So here's the thing that's kind of fascinating about this. When you put these multiplying technologies together, this is why I say it's entirely possible that we're on the brink of something. Gutenberg creating the printing press caused the Protestant Reformation. Gutenberg doing the printing press made it so regular people could actually learn to read. And that revolution lasted for 500 years. The Industrial Revolution is what brought us automobiles. It's what brought us modernization as we understand it, electric toasters, refrigerators. That refrigerators weren't common 100 years ago is a little bit astounding. Industrial Revolution, how awesome is that? The digital revolution, we're at the front end of. because we've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, we're like, computers, it's old hat. But it's not when you look and you start thinking, what industries could be disrupted, but haven't adjusted to the computer world. And you'll recognize there's a lot of industries like that. When you say, what's going to actually get these people online, you'll recognize most of the work still needs to be done. And the reason I'm saying this is because coming off of 7 years of the Second Great Depression, seeing my students go, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with my life, my heart aches for you. But if you also recognize that exactly what's driving the old jobs away is what's going to create the jobs of the future, that seems to me to be a point of hope. And so I want to leave you on a point of hope. All right, thanks. Have a good day.